The teachings of General Conference are the considerations the Lord would have before us now and in the months ahead.
Our marching orders for each 6 months are found in the General Conference addresses.
For the next 6 months, your conference edition of the Ensign should stand next to your standard works and be referred to frequently.
I encourage you to read the talks once again and to ponder the messages contained therein.
I exhort you to study the messages of this conference frequently, even repeatedly, during the next 6 months.
You're listening to the Conference Talk podcast, where it's conference weekend every weekend. Each weekend, we discuss talks from the most recent General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right. We'll share some insights, make some connections, and hopefully have a bit of fun as we study the words of the awesome men and women God has called to direct His church in these latter days. I'm Matthew Watkins.
And I'm Richard Bernard. This episode, we're talking about Elder Rasband's talk on Behold, I am the light which He shall hold up. And as I was sharing with you, Matthew, this is a great talk. In fact, as we get in here later, there's a painting I just love when it talks about upholding and sustaining our leaders. But just to start off, right there, I love this. It says, for the past 2 days we've heard Him, meaning the Spirit, speak through His chosen leaders as we might draw closer to Him. It's important to realize, I think, and I always have to remind myself, that when we have conference talk, it's the Spirit that's speaking. These are people who have callings, and they've been ordained and set apart. And I know for a fact some of them work well. Who is it? Was it President Oaks? Says that the minute General Conference is over, he starts on the next one, the talk.
I believe it.
He works on it for 6 months. And there's about 15 rewrites. So, and by the way, interesting with technology, Elder Bednar, I don't know if you heard his kind of going off the point here, but anyway, he had this talking to the youth and talking about technology. And
about AI.
He says he uses AI for his talk. Now, he doesn't use AI to
not to write his talk.
Which there are some people in the church that are doing that, by the way. But anyway, he's not doing that. But
he says don't do that, is what he said.
Don't do that. But what he's doing is using AI to see how the tone is, and then he goes back and might make some changes, and always looks at the grammar and things like that. So anyway, I just love it. I love General Conference. I always look forward to it. And after General Conference, I'm always listening and rereading these talks, because sometimes after I've heard the talk 6 times, I go, that's the first time I heard that. When did they put that in?
That's why we have this podcast. Yeah.
I wonder when they actually put that in. With the Gospel Library, they have control, and they must have added that after I listened to it for the 5 previous times.
Yeah,
anyway,
just like we keep going back and adding to the Book of Mormon every time I read it. I notice that too.
Yeah. There's too many editions of it. That's really a problem. Well, he goes on to say, to sustain means to uphold another person, to give them attention, to be faithful to their trust, to act upon their words. And I like that. Just had a recent thing. Last night, my wife and I got to go to the temple, the Ogden Temple, and clean. And so we...
Usually when we go to the temple, we are being cleaned, right? But you decided to return the favor, huh?
We physically cleaned. In fact, I personally cleaned about 160 scriptures, wiping them clean, putting them back. And I was in charge of vacuuming all of the white carpet. They actually have a vacuum that's only for the white carpet.
Cool.
I don't know why that's important, but anyway, it's something I got to learn. But my point is, I wasn't going to sign up, because a few weeks ago I had signed up to clean the temple, and my wife wasn't able to make it. So she was going to come this time, and they needed 4 people in the ward to sign up, and it was only my wife and I. And well, actually, it was my wife and one other person. And I went to the person in charge and I said, no one else has signed up? They said, no, okay. I said, I'll fill in if no one else signs up. And to me, upholding the stake and stake leaders and our ward leaders is when you've got a thing that's being passed around, you need to sign up.
Yep.
Now I know the shift was from 9:30 until 12:30. That's 3 hours. I know there are people who have to get to work quite early, but I can't believe that's the whole ward. And yet, and I just, when we sustain our leaders and raise our hand, I think it means a lot of things and not just saying, and Rasband actually talks about this.
Yep. And the way I see this talk, I have noticed recently in the church, we tend to do a little bit of mental gymnastics when it comes to sustaining. I've heard people say, oh, I sustain the brethren. I say, I've seen the stuff you're posting on Facebook and I see the messages you're putting out there, and I don't know that they would agree with you. What do you mean by you sustain the brethren? They say, well, to really love someone is to correct them. And so I'm kind of like the watchdog on the brethren. I'm here to tell them when they get it wrong, call them out, publicize their faults so that they can come in line with what I know God wants me to do. So yeah, I don't think that's what sustaining actually means. And Elder Rasband is taking that and cutting through all that mental gymnastics.
Yes.
And this strongly reminds me of that temple recommend question, where we are asked if we sustain the leaders of the church. And I feel like a lot of the church right now, especially in Western countries, especially the United States, are saying, well, and then they do all this just, well, he's only a prophet when he's speaking as a prophet. And I can sort of parse out and say, well, this stuff is when it's prophetic and this stuff's when it's not. And so, and so all this stuff, and really sustaining is being correcting. And so, yes, I sustain the prophet. That's getting really squishy on those temple recommend questions. And Elder Rasband is cutting through all that and saying, guys, when we say sustain the prophet, this is more than just, oh yeah, I raised my hand. Or this is more than just, yeah, I recognize that they are there. He's saying, no, this means we are, what it says, we understand that they speak by inspiration of the Lord and that they understand the current issues.
Yes.
I love the talk from Elder Holland where he said, you would be hard pressed to find anyone more in the times and in tune than the prophets and apostles you guys so often disparage as being out of time and out of tune. He says, there is no think tank in the world that is so aware of everything that's going on and how to address it as the apostles and prophets of God.
Absolutely. Amen to that. I'm a little bit older than you. In fact,
5 years is not a big deal, man.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, looking at you, you're probably about the age of some of my grandchildren. But anyway, let's see. I've been a member of the church since 19. I'll round it off. 1968. 1968. It's not rounding it off, but let's take 1970. Wow, that's 30. That's 40, 50 years. I have heard, even when I was first in the church, these apostles, they're men, they're old, they don't really understand what's going on. They're not involved in what's really going on in the world, and they just simply don't understand. They're living in the past. And that addresses just to what you were saying, that I've heard it for 50 years and we'll probably continue to hear it all the time. And you're absolutely right. And what you just, and who you just quoted, wow, they know what's going on. Now, I work in the priesthood family department, my mission, and I happen to know that there's all sorts of things that go on there that they are keeping in touch. They have their fingers on everything. They know what's happening in the news. They know what's going on, and they've got that prophetic license, that prophetic calling to be able to take what's actually happening and help us to understand that this is not what is gospel. We have to think celestial.
And may I suggest that to all the people saying, oh, the prophets and apostles are writing this message for a different time. You may be right, but it's 20 years in the future, not 20 years in the past. Look at the family proclamation. That was written 20 years ahead of when we need it most.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Really. Um, there is, if one goes to the conference talk, there is a picture of Moses having his arms upheld. And it's a powerful picture because it really shows Moses struggling. I don't know if anybody's tried to hold their arms up for any length of time. Even a young person, I think you would find holding your arms up like this over a period of time gets a little heavy. And Moses was quite old. And what I like about this painting, it shows, and I can't remember the names of the two that are doing it. God to forgive me. But anyway, they are struggling to hold up his arms. And that's what we have to do. We have to struggle to sustain our bishop, to sustain our stake president, and to sustain our general authorities. It's a struggle. It's not meant to be easy.
Yeah, sustaining is not a passive activity. I love what Elder Rasband says here. He quotes President Nelson with this power quote. It says, "Our sustaining of prophets is a personal commitment that we will do our utmost to uphold their prophetic priorities." And then he goes on and makes it even stronger. He says, "To hold up the prophet is a sacred work. We do not sit quietly by, but actively defend him, follow his counsel, teach his words, and pray for him." I wonder if now the brethren are very, very, very pushing hard on being peacemakers, on avoiding contention, and 100% agree with that. That is a prophetic message that we should be upholding. However, Satan loves to introduce his counterfeits of true messages. And so he loves to take the peacemaker idea and twist around saying, well, you just should never really say anything that anyone might take offense to. Right? That's how he twists it. And he says,
excellent point.
Being non-contentious means being non-controversial, right? He twists it just a little bit, and that so aligns with our natural desire not to offend people. It's the easier route. We say, sure, yep, I'm by letting wrong opinions go completely unopposed among my friends, among my family, by not raising a warning voice, I'm being a peacemaker. Well, that's not what they're asking us to do. President, again, Elder Rasband here, we do not sit quietly by, but actively defend the prophet. We follow his counsel, teach his words, and pray for him. It is our responsibility as Latter-day Saints to raise that warning voice. I was in a meeting with some people last night, and we were talking about why is it that so many of the youth are falling away from the church, my generation. And I reflected back, 90% of my peers have left the church, like right out of high school. And then many of my peers who are still active in the church hold opinions and ideas that are contrary to the doctrine. Why is it that really good people, honest, sincere, great people that I love serving with and being around can be so misguided as to what the truth is when it's staring them in the face? And the reason is this, the illusion of consensus. They go online and they see an active member of the bishopric or the stake high council sharing a message that is contrary to the doctrine of Christ, usually about a social issue. And all they receive are likes and hearts and comments of support and affirmation. And all of the members who know better, all the members who understand the gospel are too afraid to say anything, either because of blowback or because of fearing that they'd be contentious or that it's not worth it. And so many people are looking out there and saying, well, if this church leader is saying this, and if all these other active members are rushing into support, and I don't hear a single voice saying anything to the contrary, that seems like an overwhelming total consensus of church members on that issue. And then it's harder for them to hear the words of Elder Rasband or President Nelson or Elder Holland or President Oakes or any of the church leaders just twice a year and adopt that as their foundation. It is up to us to make sure that we, of course, are not contentious, not combative, respectful at all times, but we do defend the church. We do defend the prophet, and we push back politely. And even if it's just that one voice, for many people who are sitting on the fence, for many people who do not know what to do, that one voice breaks the illusion of consensus. And at the very least, they say, well, it seems that there's multiple opinions on this, and I should consider this instead of just adopting what seems like overwhelming voices in contrary of it.
Excellent comment. Excellent. I love that. I've heard I get mixed up Generation X and Y and Z. I still can't figure out what age group is which. Which generation are you in?
I don't know. Nowadays, we're
Well, if
allowed to
you don't
identify
know,
as whatever. Nowadays, we're allowed to identify as whatever we want. So I identify as the post World War II.
oh,
That
okay.
aligns with how I think, at least. So I think technically I'm a millennial, but
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, I read something in the news about Generation X, and I'm going, what age group is that? Why don't they just say the age group rather than give it a label?
The 1980s,
Anyway,
the 1990s, the 2000s. Yeah.
yeah, brother, this is in connection with what you just said, brothers and sisters. This is Elder Rasband speaking. We need to do more lifting and less murmuring.
Oh, beautiful line.
Yes. He says one of our greatest challenges today is distinguishing between the truths of God and the counterfeits of Satan, which is ties into what you were talking about. We need help. We need to be where we're receiving personal revelation ourselves. But on top of that, we need a prophet to help guide us and to let us know that where these counterfeits are. I just feel, even living here in Utah, that we're just surrounded by Babylon. And there are so many things that distract from what we're supposed to be doing. And we just really, it seems to be so easy to get attracted into Babylon. I think sports is a great thing. I personally don't watch sports. I just never enjoyed watching them. But
You're a
I
man
certainly
after
were.
my own heart, brother.
You know, I was certainly at a lot of football games because I'm a music major and I had to be in the band, but and basketball games. But I never watched them. We were just talking, and when it was time to play, we played. But I do see people. We had somebody in one of our awards. We were talking about proper Sabbath day activity, and he said, "Well, last week during Super Bowl, it was my birthday, and so my birthday present was we watched the Super Bowl on Sunday." And someone else in the quorum said, "I'm sure Heavenly Father loves football." And it's this type of stuff that just leads us down off the path to understand that maybe we don't really understand what our prophets are telling us.
Right. And if you quote the general authorities who say, hey, guess what? The most important thing is this. And so we want to avoid sports. You're like, oh, Pharisee, you're a Pharisee. Don't say that,
Yeah,
Pharisee. How dare you judge?
yeah, yeah. I'm very careful what I say in elders quorum. And sometimes I just keep my mouth shut because an example, this several years ago, but I was on some committee that had to do with family history. I don't know what it was. But anyway, there was a meeting of about seven of us that included the Relief Society and the priesthood. And they were saying, how can we get the family more involved in family history? And they were saying several ideas. And I said, can I share a quote with you? And they said, certainly. And I said, and I can't remember who exactly I quoted, but oh, I know who I quoted. It was President Benson, I believe it was. Anyway, I said, here's the quote, and I'm just paraphrasing right now because I don't have it memorized. But he was speaking to stake presidents and bishops. And he said, all of you set these wonderful goals for family history and for doing, at that time, it was genealogical work and going to temple attendance. And he named several goals. And he said, all these are worthwhile goals. But if you will study the scriptures and get everyone in your stake to studying the scriptures daily, all those other goals will be solved. There was
Yep.
dead silence, and about 15 seconds, someone goes, so what can we do to get people? I'm going, okay, I guess the message didn't get through. The answer is we need to get people to study the scriptures, and they will start doing the work that we want them to do. And that's
There's a
just one
great quote.
example.
There's a great quote from President Packer who said, the study of the doctrine changes behavior
Yes,
quicker than the study of behavior changes
yes,
behavior.
absolutely. And I know for me personally, I study the scriptures daily, and I'm not the same man I was a year ago. And I won't be the same person a year from now because it refines me and I start looking at life differently. One of the things I gave up some time ago is I just don't watch TV. I consider it a total waste of time. There's got to be things I can be doing that are better in doing the Lord's work than sitting and watching TV.
I'm not at that level of celestial living quite yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I just found, I was watching some things and they were not bad things, but I think, well, I just spent 3 hours watching, something, and maybe my time could be better spent. So
I mean, I
occasionally I'll
guess you
watch.
could say I guess you could say I don't watch TV. We sit down to watch TV and spend all 45 minutes of our time together thinking of what to watch and scrolling through Netflix to see what we want to
Oh,
watch, and then, oh, time to go to bed. So we never actually start something. So if watching TV is wasting time, what does that make that? That makes wasting time in an effort to waste time.
yeah, to waste time. I've got several quotes. I could look them up about. Um, in fact, one quote did say it was from Richard G. Scott, and I got to summarize it again, but he says, "Nothing is as important as studying the scriptures daily." Um,
I have
no,
this quote on my wall right now. Do you want me to
oh,
read it?
okay, go ahead.
Okay. This is my all-time favorite quote about studying scriptures. I printed it out. It's on my wall to remind me. President Elder Scott says, "Don't yield to Satan's lie that
Yes,
you don't have time to study the scriptures. Choose to take time to study them. Feasting on the word of God each day is more important than sleep." By the way, as a new parent, that's a powerful line. More important than sleep. School, work, television shows, video games, or social media. You may need to reorganize your priorities to provide time for the study of the Word of God. If so, do it.
yes,
Elder Scott was the most soft-spoken, most gentle apostle. Lull you right to sleep every time he speaks. But that paragraph hit me like a ton of bricks, which is why, again, I have it
yes,
pasted in my office to remind me the prophets don't often speak in hyperbole. When they say something is the most important, when they say
yes,
it's more important than the daily stuff of life, right? Sleep, school, work,
yes.
we listen.
That's exactly the quote I was thinking of. He also said that your pen is the antenna to personal revelation.
You're what now?
Your pen is
Oh,
the
pen.
antenna
Yes.
to personal revelation. So that when we study the scriptures, we should be having a pen in our hand or using our thumbs or keyboard, whatever we want to use, um, to be writing as the Spirit speaks. We need to be writing. So, okay, maybe this got off our topic a little bit, but to me, it's an
It's a
exciting
good
topic
tangent.
because that's what my mission is about, is to get people to study the scriptures daily and use the gospel library to enhance their scripture study. So, kind of coming back to the point here, um, this talk by Rasband it really hit home. He even talks about the temple. He's quoting President Nelson. All who worship in the temple, President Nelson has said, will have the power of God and angels having charge over them. Now, if that doesn't make you get to the temple, I don't know what does. Um, and I'm often I don't know, you talked about how they're telling us not to be contentious. They're also, I can't remember how many times they brought up attend the temple as often as your circumstances allow.
Every single conference.
Yes, and more than once.
Mhm.
And that means to me that you have to sit down with your spouse and say, okay, here's the month. How often can we get to the temple? Not necessarily as a couple. Maybe you'll go Tuesday and I'll go on Thursday. I'll come right home from work and or bring a pizza home for the kids to eat so I don't have to cook. And you go to the temple, whatever it takes. But how many people, I've often wondered how many people actually have sat down and tried to figure, are they attending the temple as often as their circumstances allow? I remember this goes back quite a few years, but I was in a branch at the time, and new temple was being built in the area, which meant instead of driving an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to the temple, literally 20 minutes. And someone came to me and said, I'm so excited there's going to be a temple. And it was actually 3 minutes from their home. Absolutely
Danger,
excited that.
danger.
And I happen to know because of the position I held and because I was serving in the temple. Anyway, I'm not going to go to all those circumstances. I happen to know he probably attended the temple once a year. And I said to him, I said, proximity requires more dedication. I said, you can't live right across from the temple and say you don't have time to get to the temple.
Yep.
Now, where you live, how far are you from the temple?
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
And that's in
Okay.
Tennessee. So we're in the same ward as the temple and just down the
Oh,
street from it.
okay. 8 minutes. And so obviously somebody that's 8 minutes away, I have to drive, well, it used to be 10 minutes, but now that I've moved to North Ogden, I have to drive 20 minutes to get to the temple. Used to be
Oh.
10. But when you're so close to the temple, then are we really following the counsel? And are we really upholding what the brethren are asking us to do? For example, President Nelson also asked us to read Section 109 and study it. And I wonder how many times or how many members of the church have actually done that. And to me, that's upholding the prophet.
So when something is simple, we forget to do it. If you remember in the Book of Mormon, Alma is counseling his sons, and he says, don't let us be discouraged by the easiness of the way. He's never saying, this is really hard, but you really got to knuckle down and bear and sacrifice. I know it's hard. He's really saying, I know it's super easy, but please don't forget it. I know it's super easy. Don't take it for granted. Right? You think of Naaman and the leper. Oh, you want me to just, or Naaman the leper. You want me to go, wash in the river? That's too easy. That's ridiculous. Not worth my time. It is a sad fact of humanity that the easier something is, the more we'll take it for granted. I remember on my mission, my first mission president was a hospital administrator. I know, super exciting job. But they came up with this fantastic course, this wonderful training program that they wanted people to take. And so they advertised it all over the hospital system. Great training, great professors. It was something to be very valuable on everyone's resume. And they could not get anyone to desire to show up. So they scrapped the idea for a little bit. My mission president says, I have an idea. Let's charge a $200 admittance fee for this course. For this course that they were offering for free earlier. So 6 months later, they tried again, charged $200. People were signing up. They filled up so fast.
Wow, that's
because
interesting.
they had required a sacrifice that connoted the value. This is why, if you would ask my dad from his generation, that's why the missionaries used to charge for copies of the Book of Mormon. Right? Oh, yeah, we'll charge you a nominal fee to cover printing costs. Well, actually, so you have some money and some skin in the game, and you actually want to maybe read it instead of tossing it on the bookshelf or in the trash the moment we leave.
Yes. Wow, that's an interesting story. They're charging, you got people coming. Well, maybe we should charge to be able to come to sacrament meeting.
I wonder if you might get some people who haven't attended in a while that suddenly are interested because, hey, if it's got an admittance fee, it must be good now, right? And that's the big reason that the church encourages young men to save for their missions, and young women too, to save for their missions they want to go on instead of just being funded by their parents.
Right.
When you go in the mission field, you see a difference between the missionaries who are paying their own way and those who are given this opportunity by their parents generally. Because, at least in my mind, I was very aware of what was coming out of my pocket. So I'm like, okay, every day out here is this many dollars. I can't be spending that money and not do something with it.
No, absolutely.
Maybe I'm just cheap. I don't know. I want to get the best bang for my buck.
Well, I think with Brother Rasband, I like this because he really, and you said it earlier, I'm going to rephrase it, but they don't beat around the bush. President Oaks has spoken several times about gender and everything, and I don't do it very often, but occasionally when I'm watching General Conference, I'll have my phone on Twitter or something, for hashtag General Conference. It's so interesting, the comments of people. They're going to go, um, Elder Uchtdorf spoke and he didn't mention an airplane, you know, or they'll make certain comments, and not a lot of them are spiritual comments. But occasionally someone will say, wow, that's a valid point. Wow, that is so powerful. But quite often, like with President Oaks, they're going to go, how long do you think it'll take before he talks about gender? And they're saying it in such a way like, okay, President Oaks, we got your message. Well, they haven't gotten the message, or he wouldn't be repeating it. And people haven't got the message about tending the temple as often as your circumstances allow, or they wouldn't be repeating it. And so here we have Elder Rasband talking about upholding and sustaining and doing all that we can to work together with the bishopric and the stake presidency. And not just them. It's our primary leaders and Relief Society and Elders Quorum Presidency, what we can do to actually sustain them. And it's not happening, or at least as much as it should.
To all those who love to be critical of the church and of the leaders, may I suggest, if you really think that President Nelson is wrong for insisting we get the vaccine, or President Oaks for his social positions, may I recommend that when we sustain, that means faithfulness, even if you think that they're erred in some way. We seem to understand this on the local level, and then we seem to forget it when it comes to the general. Right? We don't hold our bishops, hopefully, to a standard of perfection. Oh, you do one thing, you administrate in one way that I wouldn't do it if I were bishop, and you're no longer called and I don't have to listen to you. No, maybe it's because we know him personally. Maybe it's because he was our home teacher. We know he's a great guy. And we say, oh yeah, he's a little bit too dogmatic on programs, and reaches into the big old bucket of programs instead of ministering more. He needs more of a ministering approach. But I still love him, right? We're able to do that with local leaders. Why do we do that with the church leaders?
It's a very good question. A very good question. You mentioned vaccine. I was not going to take the COVID vaccine. I wasn't. I really didn't think it was the right thing to do. But it was brought up in General Conference by President Nelson. And the
first presidency letter.
Yeah. And the very next day, I went to Walgreens and rolled up my sleeve and said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I got there when the store opened so that I wouldn't have to stand in line or anything. But to me, that was sustaining what he asked us to do. I didn't think it was the right thing to do for various reasons, but the president asked me to do it. I did it.
I'm in the same boat, but on masking. Our stake had just gotten rid of the mask requirement because in Tennessee, everything was really good and there wasn't, the science didn't seem to be behind it. And so we had just eliminated the mask mandate for our stake for about 2 weeks when the first presidency sent out a letter. And it was a great 2 weeks. Probably 97% of our ward took off the mask right away because that's just, that's where we live. This is Tennessee. And then 2 weeks later, the first presidency sends out that letter saying, okay, we're going to ask members for the time being to mask in all of our church buildings around the world. And it was really interesting to see that very next week what people decided to do. For me, I was like, I don't see the science behind this. I don't see the benefit in it. And even after the first presidency said that, it wasn't like I had a testimony of masking. But you know what I did have a testimony of? I had a testimony of the prophet of God. And the promise is not, and I've seen people complain, oh, the vaccine was harmful, and there's all sorts of data either way on that. The promise is not that our lives are going to go swimmingly and everything's going to work out with fireworks and be spectacular from a secular point of view. The promise is we will never be in spiritual danger when we align ourselves with the prophet of God. People always go, what if he's mistaken? What if he's wrong? That's not your calling. That's not your decision. Your decision is to follow him. He will be responsible to God for what he does, and you will be blessed for what you do. When I was younger, my parents certainly were not enacted by any stretch of the imagination, but they were a little loosey-goosey on some of the commandments, and I wasn't. As a young man, as a teenager, I was a little bit more pharisaical. And so on Sunday nights, they want to take the family out to dinner, and usually I'd politely decline and stay home and have mac and cheese or something. But one Sunday, my mom says, "Look, we really want you to come with us." I said, "Well, I really don't feel comfortable, going to a business on a Sunday." She says, "Yeah, but you should come be with the family." I said, "Not if the family's doing something I think is wrong." And she said, and it was really interesting. She knew exactly how to talk to me. She said, "Look, if this is wrong, the sin be on my head. Your responsibility, your greatest commandment is to honor your father and your mother. So if this is wrong, I will bear the responsibility for that. You will bear the responsibility for being an obedient son. Now get in the car and come enjoy some Mexican food with us." And that was a lesson that stuck with me when I think about the prophet and when I think about the apostles. Number one, we're given the promise that they will not lead us astray. Does that mean that they may make administrative errors? Sure. Does that mean that each one has a different personality in how he guides his church? Of course. But we will not be spiritually harmed. We will not be deceived on grand eternal truths when we follow the prophet of God. And our responsibility in sustaining him is to defend him, to uphold him, as Elder Rasband says, to do more lifting and less murmuring, and get in the program and get in line, even when we think, I'm really not a fan of Boy Scouts and I hope it goes away someday. But you know what, gosh darn it, I've been called as the Scoutmaster and I'm going to magnify that calling. And we're doing Friends of Scouting, and I think that's a waste of money. But gosh darn it, the prophet of God says that we are going to do scouting. So I am going to ask members to contribute to that until the very last moment that it is no longer part of the church. Now, that's not the calling I had. I saw someone who was in that position, hated scouting, got called to that position after it was already announced that the church was going to sever its relationship after a certain date. And here we are 1 week out from that. And he said, "Brothers and sisters, for the next such and such number of hours, scouting is part of the church. And they have asked us to work on Friends of Scouting. So as part of that calling, I'm here to invite you." I admire that man for truly sustaining and magnifying.
Yep.
Even when it didn't necessarily fit his political or personal opinions to do so.
Absolutely. Well, I hope those who are listening will seriously consider what we've been talking about and question themselves, am I really sustaining in the fullest extent, as Elder Rasband talks about, not only our general authorities, but our bishop and stake presidency and other leaders within the ward.
Thank you for listening to the Conference Talk podcast. In this episode, we discuss Elder Ronald A. Rasband's address, "Behold, I am the light which ye shall hold up."
If you enjoyed this episode, give us a 5-star rating anywhere you get the podcast.
That's right, and check out our website, conferencetalk.org, where you can follow us on social media, drop us a comment, check out the show notes, and learn more about us, your hosts.
And if you want to follow me, you can reach me at richard@thecovenantpath.io.
And if you want to follow me, Matthew Watkins, you can find me at my blog, powerinthebook.com, or on Twitter. My handle is A True Millennial.
But while we always appreciate new followers, it's better to follow the prophet and the apostles themselves.
That's right. Even though we love speaking about the church and our leaders, we never speak for them. Everything said on this podcast represents just our own personal opinions.
So, join us the next time in making every weekend Conference Weekend on the Conference Talk Podcast.